Welcome to Project Catalyst, an economic development podcast. I'm Tina Emerson, Chief Marketing Officer with Maynard Nexon, and I'm joined here today with David Spratley. He's Director of Economic Development in our Raleigh office. Good to see you, David.
Well, good to see you too. Thanks a lot. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today with one of my all-time favorite people.
Awesome. I can't wait. Today we're going to be talking to Andrew Tate. He's Economic Development Director with Duke Energy in North Carolina. Prior to joining Duke, Andrew was Vice President of Real Estate for North Carolina Railroad Company. And for a decade prior to that, he served as President and CEO of Henderson County Partnership for Economic Development. Andrew is also a past president of the North Carolina Economic Development Association Board of Directors. Welcome and thank you for taking the time for us today, Andrew.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, David. I appreciate the opportunity to join you guys. Thank you.
Well, great. Well, let's jump right into it, Andrew. Kind of one of the most important issues facing economic development these days is power, specifically the availability of power. I know there are a number of projects out there that are seeking large, if not huge amounts of power, 300, 400, 500 megawatts, in some rare cases, over a gigawatt of power. The trend started years ago, I think, with EV battery and semiconductor projects, but kind of has transformed a bit through very large AI data center projects over the last several years. And so it's really accelerated that trend, at least from what I'm seeing. What are you seeing out there as far as high demand power projects? And do you see an end in sight?
Great question, David. We've seen projects ranging even as high as 3 gigawatts of demand in the past few years. That's not typical, but it is an indicator of a growing appetite for power that significantly exceeds historical trends. A large power project for our team just a few years ago might have been 5 to 10 megawatts, and most likely that would have been served from our distribution system. Today, we routinely see projects in the 20 to 100 megawatt plus range. We have in excess of 100 data center inquiries that are active in North Carolina right now. And some of these projects are in emerging technology sectors. Some of them are, as you referenced, in the semiconductor, data center, solar panel, and battery space. But yeah, it's definitely beyond what we historically have become accustomed to. And one important piece to that, I think, is that energy's increasing influence in the economic development decision-making space. It's not uncommon for these kinds of projects for energy to be the number one or the number two ongoing cost to the business, either right ahead of or right behind payroll, which means cost is a big part of the equation, but cost is largely irrelevant if you don't have a reliable energy system. So you'll see Duke Energy continue to stay focused on affordable and cost competitive energy, a reliable energy system, and increasingly clean.
Andrew, just to help us understand, and the folks listening out there, when we're talking about these large amounts of power, give us some sense of what the scale is to that. Help us understand, what is 100 megawatts or what is a gigawatt?
Yeah, so great question. And the scale is, frankly, difficult to comprehend just because the magnitude is so different from what we're accustomed to. But your average kind of general manufacturing project historically, David, might have used 1 to 3, maybe 5 megawatts. Every now and then you'd see a cold storage project or something in the life sciences industry that would be 5 to 10, occasionally a steel or metals project that would get you in the 40 to 50, maybe 70 megawatt range. And really the original wave of data center projects were mostly in the 50 to 150 megawatt range. So to put that in scale with kind of what we're seeing today, just a general reminder, 1 gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts, 1 megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. And if you just talk about, you referenced earlier, a 1 gigawatt project or 1,000 megawatt project, if that project is at 90% load factor, meaning that it operates at its peak demand roughly 90% of the time, that project will consume almost as much power as every customer in Wake County consumes. So
yeah, wow,
just
that's
scaling
amazing.
wise, yeah, it's different from what we're accustomed to. The demands are new, and the demands require a proactive stance from utility companies.
And how are you meeting those challenges of high demand? Do you have the capacity to provide that kind of power quickly? And how do you prepare for that?
So I'll walk you through a little bit. We used an integrated resource planning process. I might refer to it as an IRP process. That process is used in both North and South Carolina. And I'll just provide a short explanation. Every 2 years, we update our IRP to propose methods to meet the forecasted energy demands over the next 15 years. So we're always looking at a 15-year planning horizon, but every 2 years, we have the opportunity to put forward new proposals. And that system is working well for us because it allows us to check and adjust as needed. From a timing perspective, we have just received, as of last week, an order from the North Carolina Utilities Commission, which directs us going forward for the next 15 years and steers us to align generation resources with future demand. So a big part of that is forecasting. We're looking at who's coming, expected growth. And I'll point out, because what's notable about this plan is that our currently forecasted load growth by 2030 is 8 times higher than the growth we projected just two years ago. So historically, we might have expected 0.5% to 1% growth year over year. This is a very different situation. When you look at all the generation resources that we've built and contracted for in North Carolina and South Carolina over the past 60 years, so every nuclear plant, coal plant, natural gas plant, storage facility, and all of the solar that's made North Carolina number 4 in the nation in that field, we must build over half of that again within the next decade to meet the energy needs of the Carolinas. So that's just a little summary on how we plan and prepare and how we work every day to kind of forecast the future needs for energy demands and how we're going to meet them.
Wow, it's puts things in perspective, doesn't it? That's a lot of work to be done. But even in the situations where you can meet large demand needs for a project, it takes time to make the improvements necessary to support that. These days, I've seen energy providers quote 3, 4, even 5 years to build out or upfit a substation to support a project like that. What are you, Duke, quoting these days as far as time necessary, specifically for a substation to be built? And what's driving those timelines, those extended timelines now? And what, if anything, can be done to help shorten the timeline?
Great question. And you're absolutely right. I've watched timelines for customer substations with the transmission service delivery move from 18 to 24 months to 3 to 4 years, as you said. I haven't heard anybody say 5 years yet. That's the first time I've heard you say it, but that makes me feel better, David, that we potentially are in a more competitive situation. 3 to 4 years, the reason for the variance is largely dependent on the type of circuit that's being tapped and the equipment that's needed to build the delivery. The dominant variable in that increase in timeline has been equipment procurement and supply chain challenges, specifically with large power transformers that are in the 40 to 80 MVA space and high voltage and specialty circuit breakers, which are long lead time equipment. And this procurement or supply chain challenge is a little different from others that we saw during and after COVID, because this equipment had really been relatively steady in the recent past. It was this sudden increase in load growth that placed unusual demands on the supply chain. And it may be too soon to say this, but we're seeing some of those inventory challenges start to settle with big improvements in timelines, and that should result in opportunities to shorten those timelines. As to the second part of your question, what can we do creatively to work with our customers? We always work with them to explore opportunities to meet their needs and timelines. In some cases, a customer may choose to construct their own substation, and we provide the transmission delivery. In other cases, we may have a power transformer that can act as a temporary delivery to bridge to the permanent delivery. And in other cases, we can provide an interim radial transmission feed while the permanent feed is under construction. And lastly, then this is an area where our team has proven to add great value on competitive economic development projects. We can engage early in the site selection process and recommend sites that have inherent advantages to timeline in existing and future infrastructure. And this is where one of the ways that I think our team really shines and provides a comprehensive energy value proposition.
Yeah, I do think that's a key point from my experience involving the power providers, and specifically, obviously, in your case, Duke. Early on in the process can really save you some grief. I can't tell you how many times I've seen companies go down a wrong path on a site with a large power requirement, but going to a site that's not ever going to be able to deliver it. So I guess I'll reiterate your position there, that is, reach out to your power provider early in the process.
Thank you.
And switching gears here, what is Duke doing on the green energy front? And in trying to meet those needs, how does that ever inhibit your ability to power large projects? How do you marry up those two requirements?
So if you think back to the integrated resource planning process that I mentioned earlier, a key component of the effort to align future generation resources with energy demands includes our work to decarbonize. And specifically in North Carolina, a few years ago, House Bill 951 was passed with bipartisan support, and it helps guide our energy transition. The bill moves us away from coal, adds new renewables and advanced nuclear. It strengthens our customer solar programs and sets us on a path to decarbonization by 2050. Importantly, that bill also provides guidance that we must decarbonize without sacrificing reliability and using least cost methods, which is a challenging balance, but it reflects our approach in this energy transition. That House Bill 951, when paired with the integrated resource planning process, acts as I think, a competitive advantage for North Carolina, because it shows a prospective customer where we are headed as a state and a utility. It is essentially a blueprint for our energy transition, and that translates into a valuable narrative for a company that's considering North Carolina as a location.
Can I ask one question on that topic, but a little bit more specific? Talk to me about nuclear. You see that Microsoft is, I guess, contracted for reactor at 3 Mile Island for a data center project to restart one of those reactors there. Microsoft coincidentally just announced that they have purchased 1,300 acres of Person Mega Site here in North Carolina for what I'm assuming will be a large data center project. And then there's a lot of talk about small modular reactors and how they may serve as a potential partial solution to some of this. Help me understand kind of where you think nuclear fits in.
Great question. And one thing I'll share kind of just from the very beginning that a lot of people may not know is that Duke Energy operates the nation's largest nuclear fleet of generation resources today. So when people talk about nuclear and the prospect of nuclear in the future, the experience that's held inside of Duke Energy in that space is substantial. If you look at our recently approved integrated resource planning process, or the carbon plan, it includes the potential for an additional 2.1 gigawatts of advanced nuclear. So when you talk about small modular nuclear and you talk about advanced nuclear, it is very much a part of our plan in the future. One of the other, I think, benefits of our experience in the nuclear realm includes really a embedded advantage that roughly 55% of North Carolina's current generation capacity is carbon free through Duke Energy. That's owned and operated generation. And that includes our nuclear resources as well as our new renewable energy assets that we own and operate. So, David, when you're working with a company that has decarbonization goals or is interested in nuclear, we've got a great story to tell about our experience, about where we're headed as a company. And if that company wants to offset their usage or consumption with decarbonized power, they have to offset less in North Carolina than in most places because of our existing generation stack.
We're about run out of time, Andrew. Thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your insight from the power perspective. Obviously, it is a critical driver for any economic development project. You can't operate without it. So thank you for your insight, and thank you, David, for yours as well. And we will see you next time on Project Catalyst. Project Catalyst, an economic development podcast, is a Maynard Nexon and NP Strategy production. To learn more about the podcast and subscribe, visit thecatalystpod.com or find us on your favorite podcast platform.